The galaxy hummed with the tranquil rhythm of stability. The Xalan Empire had reigned supreme for centuries, their influence stretching across the stars like a cold iron fist. Their fleets dominated space, their cities gleamed with the luxury of 1,000 conquered worlds, and their rule was unquestioned. The Xalan were a people who had forgotten what it was like to be threatened, an empire so secure in its might that peace had become a certainty, not a fragile construct. Their reign was unchallenged, or so they believed. But as the peace lingered, a disturbance began to stir in the vastness of space, a faint, pulsing signal lost in the endless expanse. It was the kind of signal that would be easily overlooked by those not paying attention, the kind that faded in the hum of cosmic radiation. Yet to those who had eyes to see, it was a beacon, an anomaly of ancient design. The frequency was unmistakable. It had been silent for centuries, but now it echoed through the Xalan command center with an eerie clarity. "Admiral, we're receiving a strange signal," one of the Xalan technicians said, voice tinged with hesitation as they analyzed the frequency. The room fell silent. The Xalan Empire had long since disregarded any remnants of the old primitive races that once thrived in the galaxy. Earth, the birthplace of humanity, had long been considered a forgotten relic of the past, a planet reduced to rubble in the wake of a war lost to time. The idea that any human could still be alive, let alone capable of sending a signal, was absurd. And yet here it was. Unidentified source, origin unknown, the technician continued. It matches the signal frequency once used by the human distress beacons, but that's impossible, isn't it? Admiral Jarnak, commander of the Xalan's Imperial Fleet, glanced up from the war plans displayed on the holographic screen. His eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked briefly toward the technician. The room, once humming with the quiet energy of routine, seemed to hold its breath. "Dismiss it," Jarnak said, his voice carrying an air of authority. But beneath it, there was a flicker of unease. The idea that humanity's long-dead remnants might be stirring again was laughable. "We've moved beyond such relics. Focus on the upcoming campaign." But the technician hesitated, a thin line of sweat appearing on his brow as his fingers danced nervously over the controls. "Sir, it's growing stronger. The signal is intensifying. Someone is definitely transmitting this." Jarnak's lips curled into a tight smile, masking his growing discomfort. "Perhaps a misguided ship on the edge of our borders," he said. "In any case, if it's a human—" He cut himself off, his words suddenly feeling hollow. There was no need to dwell on such an absurdity. Humans were a lost species, extinct in the galaxy's grand scheme of things. But the signal didn't stop. It grew louder, clearer. An unmistakable pattern emerged, a message hidden within the pulse of static. And then the words. Simple, direct, cold. "Your empire will burn." The words cut through the room like a blade. The technician froze, wide-eyed, staring at the screen. The message was unmistakable. Human. Admiral Jarnak's gaze locked on the signal. His heart, long accustomed to the steady beat of control and dominance, now pounded with a strange, foreign feeling. Fear. His fingers hovered over the console, but he did not reach for it. It was too much of a risk, too much uncertainty. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath. The message repeated, louder now, as though it could not be ignored. The Xalan Empire, supreme and untouchable, had just been warned. And no one knew what would come next. The Xalan Empire had never known fear, not truly. The word was as alien to them as weakness, a concept that had no place in their vast dominion. Yet, as the words of the human message echoed through the control room, a palpable unease spread among the assembled officers. The hum of the consoles, the chatter of tactical strategists, all seemed to fade into the background as Admiral Jarnak stood frozen before the flickering signal. The message, simple and haunting, repeated again, now burning into the minds of everyone present. "Your empire will burn." The room felt suddenly too small. The silence stretched, suffocating, as the officers exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the way it was supposed to be. The Xalan Empire was untouchable, immortal. They had crushed every rebellion, subdued every adversary with overwhelming force. The humans were a forgotten race, their world consumed in fire centuries ago. There was nothing left of them, nothing but dusty records and vague history. And yet, here they were, returning from the depths of time itself. "Track the source," Jarnak commanded, his voice cutting through the tension, though it sounded strained, even to his own ears. The technician scrambled, tapping into every corner of the Empire's far-reaching surveillance systems. His fingers moved in a blur, but every attempt to trace the signal came up empty. It was as if the transmission itself was a shadow, impossible to pin down. "Admiral." The technician stammered, voice quivering. "The signal. It's moving. It's not coming from any known location in the galaxy." Jarnak's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, not coming from any known location? It's as if it's everywhere, a shifting frequency, like it's warping through space itself." The tension in the room escalated, and a cold chill crept along the edges of the Xalan commander's thoughts. He forced himself to suppress it. The Empire was strong. He had to believe that. Yet there was something unsettling about this situation, something primal and unexplainable. "Enough," Jarnak snapped, his authority returning. "We will not be intimidated by this. Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. Track down this signal and destroy whatever is causing it. It's nothing more than a dying echo from the past. Nothing more." But deep down, a nagging suspicion gnawed at him, one he couldn't shake. Why had the humans chosen this moment to return? Why this message? "Your empire will burn." It was a threat, yes, but also something else. It felt like a warning, a promise. And worse still, the eerie calmness of the message suggested they were certain, not desperate. Days passed, and Jarnak's fleet moved swiftly to investigate the source of the signal. They scoured the outer rim, moving from one forgotten world to the next, dismantling the myth of human survivors piece by piece. Yet, as they drew closer to the coordinates that the signal appeared to originate from, something unexpected happened. A small vessel, ancient and battered, appeared in the dark vacuum of space, drifting, almost as if it had been waiting for them. The ship was unlike anything that Xalan had ever encountered, smaller than the usual human craft they had records of, but its hull was sleek and black, absorbing light like a void. There were no transmissions from the ship, no attempts at communication. It was simply there. "Open a channel," Jarnak ordered, his voice laced with an edge of impatience. The command was given, but there was only static in return. And then, in a low, unnerving tone, a voice broke through the noise. "I warned you." The words were unmistakable, and they hit Jarnak like a physical blow. It was the same voice from the message. But this time it was no longer a distant echo. This time, it was here. Admiral Evelyn Cade's voice, the voice of humanity, and it carried with it an unsettling certainty that threatened to unravel everything the Xalan Empire had once believed. "Prepare to meet your reckoning, Jarnak," the voice continued, calm but filled with the weight of centuries. "Your empire will burn." The channel cut abruptly, and the room fell into dead silence. Jarnak's pulse quickened as he stood there, staring at the empty communication screen. In that moment, something cracked in his mind, a flicker of doubt. The human race, long thought destroyed, had returned, and they were not here to negotiate. They were here to fulfill their promise. The Xalan Empire was not as secure as they once believed, and the fire they had long avoided was now closing in on them. The silence that followed the transmission hung like a dark cloud over Admiral Jarnak and his officers. The cold, distant words of Admiral Evelyn Cade, the leader of the human remnant, still reverberated in his mind. "Prepare to meet your reckoning, Jarnak. Your empire will burn." He had been a commander for decades, and he knew the weight of a threat when he heard one. But something in Cade's voice struck a chord, one that he couldn't dismiss. It was not the desperation of a doomed species. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had seen the end coming, and was now making it inevitable. Jarnak stood motionless in front of the large tactical display, watching as his fleet drifted across the sector. His mind raced. The Xalan Empire was a juggernaut. There was no way these humans, these long-forgotten survivors, could possibly threaten their might. Yet that message, that unrelenting certainty, his instincts screamed that there was something he was missing, something about humanity's return that defied all logic. "Admiral," came the voice of his lead strategist, cutting through the silence. "The human vessel has entered the system. It's heading directly toward us." Jarnak's eyes flicked to the screen. The human ship was small, too small to be a proper warship. Yet it moved with purpose, weaving through the debris of shattered asteroids and abandoned stations, almost as if it were anticipating their next move. He narrowed his eyes. "Is it alone?" "Affirmative, sir. No other ships are in range," came the response. "But we've been unable to get a solid lock on its position. It's as if it's cloaking itself." Jarnak's heart skipped a beat. Cloaking technology was advanced. Even the Xalan hadn't perfected it. If this human vessel was using such technology, it was a clear message. The humans had something far beyond what they should have. Something they hadn't shown yet. "Ready the fleet," Jarnak commanded, his voice now cold and steady. "Prepare for engagement. We will show them that we are not to be trifled with." The tension aboard the Xalan flagship was palpable as the fleet's immense firepower was readied. The engines of the colossal warships roared to life, and their weapons systems hummed with deadly intent. They were a force to be reckoned with, and there was no way this small human vessel could stand against them. The first strike came without warning. A single pulse, so fast and so precise, tore through the shield of the nearest Xalan cruiser. The energy blast sent a shockwave that rattled the entire fleet, causing ships to stagger. It was a clean shot, a perfect hit at the cruiser's weak point. The ship's hull buckled, and then, in the blink of an eye, it disintegrated in a brilliant flash of light. The crew aboard the ship never stood a chance. Jarnak's eyes widened. This wasn't a random strike. This was calculated. A message. "All ships, return fire." Jarnak bellowed, his voice now strained. The fleet opened fire, unleashing volleys of plasma and energy beams toward the human ship. But it moved with an almost unnatural agility, dodging and weaving with precision that left the Xalan commanders staring in disbelief. "What in the name of the gods is happening?" the strategist murmured. Another hit. The human ship, small, unassuming, fired again, this time directly into the heart of a battlecruiser. The ship's systems failed instantly, and it spiraled into a slow, chaotic death as its shields collapsed and engines exploded in a stunning display of destruction. The Xalan fleet, known for its immense firepower and tactical superiority, was now losing ships at a staggering rate. Every shot the humans fired seemed to be expertly placed, each move a step ahead of the Xalan. Their fleet, once poised for victory, was now on the defensive. "What is their strategy?" Jarnak muttered under his breath, trying to piece together the pattern. How could these humans, these long-dead ghosts of history, be so precise? The human vessel, barely a speck compared to the Xalan juggernauts, danced around the battlefield, an impossible ghost, slipping in and out of range with uncanny timing. It was as though it could predict every move before it was made. The Xalan had the firepower, the technology, and the numbers, but what they didn't have was adaptability. The humans fought in a way that was almost alien to them, relentless, unpredictable, and eerily intuitive. "Admiral," the strategist said, his voice shaky, "it's almost as if they know us. They know exactly how we fight." Jarnak's eyes narrowed. It wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a game. And the humans were playing by rules that Xalan had never encountered. Just then, the human vessel made its move, With a sudden burst of speed, it dropped directly into the center of the Xalan fleet, scattering the ships with reckless abandon. Plasma cannons raked across the hulls of multiple ships, ripping through them in a coordinated strike that left Jarnak gasping. The human ship came to a stop in the middle of the chaos. There was no sound in space, but if there had been, Jarnak was certain he would have heard the mocking silence of the human vessel, daring the Xalan to make the next move. And then, across the communications channel, a single voice cut through the chaos. "Is this all you have?" It was Admiral Cade's voice, calm, collected, and utterly certain. "Prepare to burn, Jarnak," she said. And in that moment, Jarnak realized the battle had only just begun. Admiral Jarnak stood frozen in the heart of his command center, his face a mask of disbelief. That Xalan fleet, the pride of the Empire, was crumbling before him. The human ship, still impossibly small, still impossibly agile, moved through the chaos with a speed that no fleet of its size should possess. It dodged, weaved, and struck with terrifying precision, each blast leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. And worse, it was doing it all without breaking a sweat. For a moment, Jarnak wondered if the Xalan Empire was facing an enemy they had never prepared for, one that knew them too well. A momentary crack of panic crept into his chest, but he forced it down. He was a commander of the Xalan, a being forged by battle and conquest. This could be dealt with. It had to be. "Report," he barked, his voice sharp as the desperate echoes of his officers filled the air. "Admiral, we've sustained heavy casualties," came the grim voice of his tactical officer. "We've lost 2 more cruisers, and our remaining forces are in disarray. We can't get a clean shot. The human vessel, it's anticipating our every move." Jarnak's eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me that a single ship is outmaneuvering our entire fleet?" The officer hesitated, and then whispered, "Yes, sir. It's as if they know exactly where we're going to strike before we do. We're being outflanked at every turn." A surge of anger rippled through Jarnak, but he kept his composure. This wasn't just a battle. It was a humiliation. That Xalan had never been outplayed in this manner. It was almost as if the humans had studied them, learned their tactics, and adapted. But how? The humans were supposed to be extinct. They had no fleet, no power, nothing but a lost, dead world. How were they doing this? "Reinforce the flanks," Jarnak snapped, trying to regain control. "Bring in the dreadnoughts. Full assault." But even as he gave the order, his mind was racing. He had faced countless battles, fought off insurrections, crushed entire civilizations beneath his boot, but this was something different, something calculated. It was almost as if the humans had been waiting for this moment. A sharp beeping cut through his thoughts. "Admiral, we've just intercepted a transmission," his communications officer said, voice trembling slightly. "It's from them. It's coming from the human vessel." Jarnak's teeth clenched. "Put it through," he demanded. The cold, measured voice of Admiral Evelyn Cade filled the room, breaking the silence like a blade through cloth. "You're losing, Jarnak," she said, her tone serene, almost amused. "And you don't even understand why. You think it's your ships, your weapons, your power. But you've underestimated something far greater, the human mind. This battle was never about your fleets or your strength. It's about what we've learned, what we've become. And you've just walked right into our trap." Jarnak's blood ran cold. A trap. They were winning. The humans were losing ships. They were being cornered. How could this be a trap? But Cade continued, her voice cutting through his thoughts with surgical precision. "You see, Jarnak, what you fail to realize is that the war has already been won. Not with weapons, not with ships, but with something far older. Something far..." The data began to flow across the screens, and Jarnak's officers worked frantically to analyze every scrap of intelligence they had on the human species. The truth was a slow burn, but when it finally hit, It was as if the floor had dropped out beneath him. The humans hadn't been outmaneuvering them just because of their speed or tactics. They had been using something far more ancient, something that defied every strategy Jarnak had ever known. The humans were adapting in real time, evolving their responses faster than the Xalan could react. They had been studying the Xalan, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their mistakes. And they had one weapon that the Xalan never anticipated: their ability to learn. The humans were more than survivors. They were hunters. And now it was Jarnak's turn to become the prey. Before he could act, another wave of destruction hit. This time, it wasn't a single pulse from the human vessel. It was an entire barrage, seemingly from nowhere. The Xalan fleet was blindsided once again. And in the middle of the carnage, the human ship disappeared into the dark void of space, vanishing like a ghost. The humans weren't just playing a game. They had set the rules. And now, the Xalan were the ones being hunted. Jarnak's heart raced as he realized the unthinkable. The humans weren't just returning to reclaim their world. They were coming to destroy everything. The silence that followed the last attack was suffocating. The hum of damaged systems and the sharp beeping of distress signals filled the command deck of the Xalan flagship, but Jarnak's mind was far from these trivial sounds. His heart raced, his thoughts jumbled as he tried to piece together the truth. What had just happened? How had they lost so much ground to a single human vessel? The screen before him flickered, displaying the remains of two more Xalan ships. Charred, twisted metal floating like ruins in the wake of an unseen predator. The human ship had vanished again, blending into the void, its movements so swift, so precise, it was as if it had never been there at all. A phantom, always one step ahead, always out of reach. "Admiral, we've lost contact with 3 of the dreadnoughts," came a voice from the communications officer. "Their power systems have completely failed. There's no sign of the enemy ship. It's as if it never existed." "Damn it," Jarnak snarled, slamming his fist into the edge of the command table. His officers shrank back, clearly terrified, but there was no one to direct his rage at. The human ship, the enemy that had haunted their every move, was gone. Or was it? "Have we received any new transmissions?" he asked, his voice grating with frustration. He refused to believe that their foe was simply gone. It was too clean, too perfect. "Not yet, sir," came the reply. "Then get the tracking systems online again. I want that ship found." His voice was louder now, a command that left no room for argument. But in the silence that followed, something inside Jarnak twisted. It wasn't just the battle. It wasn't just the ships or the weapons. It was something deeper. He had lived his entire life with the knowledge that the Xalan Empire was untouchable. They were the hunters, not the prey. And now, for the first time, he was questioning everything he had ever believed. The humans weren't just trying to survive. They were methodical, calculating, and disturbingly capable of outsmarting them at every turn. "Sir," one of his officers spoke up, his voice low and hesitant. "There's something else. The data we've gathered from the human ship, it's not like anything we've ever seen before." Jarnak's gaze snapped toward the officer. "What are you talking about?" The officer swallowed hard before continuing. "The weapons systems, the tactics, the energy signatures, they're all human, yes, but they're also evolving. Almost like they're adapting in real time to our tactics. It's as if they're learning faster than we are." Jarnak's breath caught in his throat. His worst fears were being realized. It wasn't just their ships. It wasn't just their weapons. The humans were evolving, adapting, in a way that was completely unnatural. They had never shown this kind of advancement in their history. "Have you identified the source of their technology?" Jarnak demanded. The officer hesitated. "No, sir. The data is fragmented, but it's clear. They'd been holding something back, something far more dangerous than we've anticipated." Jarnak's mind raced. If the humans had been hiding something, a weapon or an ability, it could explain their sudden resurgence. He thought of the transmission from Admiral Cade. The war has already been won. It felt like a taunt now, a cruel hint at what was coming. The humans were no longer the weak, disorganized species they had once been. They were something else entirely. He turned to his tactical officer. Set a course for the human colony. I want everything prepared for a final assault. We're going to end this now. But the officer hesitated, his face pale. Admiral, we don't know where they're hiding. They're too fast. Too elusive. Jarnak's gaze turned icy. Then we find them. We hunt them down. But as he spoke those words, his mind wandered back to the human ship. How was it possible for such a small vessel to move with such precision, to strike with such power? There had to be something he was missing, some piece of the puzzle that would explain this madness. Admiral, came the voice of his strategist, cutting through his thoughts. We've located something large, hidden in the nearby system. It's a structure, but it's buried beneath a mass of debris. Jarnak's heart skipped a beat. A structure. How large? Significantly larger than anything we've seen so far. It could be a base, or something worse. A base, a hidden fortress. Something the humans had been building while the Xalan focused on their empire's expansion. Jarnak's instincts screamed at him. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The humans had been preparing for this. They had been planning, hiding, building something that would change the course of this war. Prepare the fleet, Jarnak ordered, his voice low and dangerous. We strike now. We destroy whatever they've been hiding, and we end this once and for all. As the fleet adjusted its course, heading toward the unknown structure in the debris field, a feeling of dread washed over him. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was the beginning of the end. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And the reckoning, the final battle, was about to unfold. But Jarnak couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were already too late. The war had already been won, just not by them. The Xalan fleet moved with ruthless precision as it cut through the debris field, its ships forming a tight formation around the coordinates of the human base. The tactical officers monitored every scan, every radar pulse, but there was nothing. No sign of the human vessel, no indication of any active resistance. The silence was deafening, the void of space filled only with the hum of the Xalan engines as they advanced deeper into the field. Admiral Jarnak's mind was a whirlwind of calculation, doubt, and a gnawing sense of foreboding. Every fiber of his being screamed that something wasn't right. The humans had vanished before, but this time felt different. They were leading him into something. He could feel it, the calm before the storm. Admiral, the lead navigator said, his voice tense. We've reached the coordinates. No signs of activity. No ships, no weapons. Jarnak's jaw tightened. Is it a trap? He demanded. There was a pause on the bridge. No one had the answer. Just then, the comms officer spoke, a flicker of panic in his voice. Sir, we're receiving a message from the human ship. It's a broadcast. On all frequencies. Jarnak's heart skipped. Put it through. The screen blinked to life, revealing Admiral Evelyn Cade. But this time, her expression was different. Gone was the calm, collected demeanor. She was smiling almost too calmly. Her eyes gleamed with an unsettling confidence. Hello, Admiral Jarnak, she said, her voice sweet yet laced with something far darker. I trust you're enjoying the quiet. You're probably wondering where my fleet is, aren't you? Jarnak clenched his fists. What is this game, Cade? Show yourself. Oh, we're right here, Jarnak, she replied, her smile widening. In fact, we've been here all along. You just haven't been able to see us. Before Jarnak could respond, the space around him seemed to shimmer. A pulse of energy washed through the fleet, distorting the very fabric of space itself. The stars in the background warped, bending in strange, impossible angles. The tactical displays went haywire as interference filled the sensors, scrambling their readings. "What in the abyss is happening?" one of the officers shouted as the ship's systems began to overload. "We've lost all tracking systems. The enemy fleet. It's here, Admiral." Jarnak's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't see anything. No ships, no signs of movement. But they were here. The humans had somehow cloaked themselves, hidden in plain sight. He was surrounded. "Admiral," came the voice of his lead strategist, frantic. "We've made a terrible mistake. The human vessel isn't alone. They've had this entire system rigged. They've set all the coordinates. They've led us here, into a labyrinth." As if on cue, the first wave of human ships materialized out of the distortion. But these were not mere warships. These were fortresses, gargantuan structures, monstrous and heavily armed, that emerged from the very fabric of the debris field. Their hulls were coated in energy-dampening materials, their signatures barely detectable until it was too late. The Talon fleet was already at the heart of the trap. The human ships launched swarms of smaller craft, seemingly from nowhere, and they swarmed over the Talon like a horde of locusts, overwhelming them with pinpoint strikes and devastating force. "Return fire. All units, engage." Jarnak bellowed, but his orders were drowned out by the rising chaos. His ships were scrambling to retaliate, but it was futile. The humans were everywhere, appearing from every angle, attacking with deadly efficiency. For every Talon ship that fired back, 2 more human ships struck from impossible positions. And then, the worst blow of all came. A massive wave of energy shot out from the heart of the human fleet, and it was like nothing Jarnak had ever seen. The pulse tore through the very core of his flagship, sending the entire ship into a violent shudder. The crew was thrown to the floor as alarms blared, and systems began to fail across the ship. Jarnak gritted his teeth as he clung to the command chair. "What was that?" he demanded. The communications officer's voice was trembling. "A gravity pulse. Sir, we've been hit with an artificial black hole. The core of the ship is destabilizing." Jarnak's mind reeled. The humans weren't just outgunning them. They had developed a weapon that could manipulate gravity itself. The implications were staggering. With this weapon, that Axelan couldn't even rely on their superior firepower. They couldn't even trust the stability of their own ships. But there was something else, something more insidious. The way the humans had planned everything. Every move, every attack. It had all been calculated. It was like they had known exactly how the Axelan would react, knew the exact point at which they would make their move. This wasn't a fight. This was a massacre. "Admiral, we're losing power," the navigator called out. "We can't maintain orbit. We're..." A deafening explosion ripped through the ship, and the view screen went black. Jarnak's heart pounded in his chest. It wasn't just the flagship. It was the entire fleet. Every ship, every command ship, every dreadnought was being torn apart, piece by piece. And then, in the chaos, the voice of Admiral Cade cut through the static. "Goodbye, Jarnak. I hope you enjoy the quiet." The comms cut off. And for the first time, Jarnak realized there was no coming back from this. The humans had already won. The explosion rocked Jarnak's senses as the view screen sputtered, the holographic displays flickering out one by one. His flagship was dying. Pieces of metal and debris floated past the shattered viewports, and outside, the remaining Talon ships were being torn apart by the relentless barrage from the human fleet. But even as the chaos raged, Jarnak's mind refused to accept what was happening. His entire life, every battle, every victory, had led to this moment. And yet, he couldn't process it. The humans had outsmarted him, outflanked him. And now, they were methodically dismantling everything he had built. "Admiral, we're losing power to the main engines," came a voice from the bridge crew, but it felt distant, as though coming from another world. Our shields are gone. The hull integrity is. Shut up! Jarnak roared, his voice jagged with disbelief. What is this? How are they doing this? The officer shrank back, eyes wide with fear, and for the first time, Jarnak realized that he wasn't the only one shaken to his core. His crew, his officers, were just as terrified as he was. It was one thing to fight a known enemy, to wage war against species that adhered to predictable tactics. But these humans, they had thrown out the rulebook. They had learned, evolved, and struck back with a vengeance that no one could have foreseen. Jarnak clenched his fists, blood boiling in his veins. We will not be the prey, he snarled. Send out the last of our drones. Get me a counterattack. But as he said it, he realized the futility of his words. They were already out of options. The drones that had once been a symbol of the Salon Empire's dominance were now being sliced apart mid-flight by the human vessels. Their strategy was flawless. Cut off their escape routes, disable their weapons, and pick off the stragglers. That Salon weren't just losing. They were being hunted. And worse, it felt like they were walking into a slaughter. Admiral. The voice of his tactical officer broke through the fog of his thoughts. We're detecting a transmission coming from the human fleet. Jarnak turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. Is it Kate again? No, sir, the officer replied, voice trembling. It's not a message. It's a broadcast, but it's directed at all of us. Jarnak felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. Directed at all of us. His mind raced. What was it this time? A final insult. A message to the entire Salon Empire. He had been played like a fool for far too long, and now the humans were showing their true faces. Put it through, he commanded, voice strained. The screen flickered and crackled, but this time, it wasn't Cade's face that appeared. Instead, a new figure came into focus. A young human, his expression calm yet filled with an intensity that chilled Jarnak to the core. The man's features were sharp, his eyes piercing through the screen as if he could see right into Jarnak's soul. Admiral Jarnak, the man said softly, but his voice carried across the bridge with a chilling clarity. I'm sure you're wondering why you're losing. You're wondering why your ships, your fleet, your strategies are failing. You think you're facing a superior force, but you're wrong. Jarnak's throat tightened. This wasn't just a human soldier. This was him. The one behind all of it. The one who had masterminded the strategy that had crippled the Salon fleet from the start. The realization hit him like a slap to the face. The humans weren't just fighting. They had planned every single step of this, orchestrating it with a cold precision that Jarnak had never believed possible. You've underestimated us, the human continued, his gaze unwavering. For centuries, you've destroyed civilizations, wiped out species, left entire worlds in ruin. And now, you're seeing what happens when you push too far, when you try to exterminate humanity. Jarnak's heart pounded in his chest. Exterminate humanity. The words felt foreign, out of place. But as the man's voice echoed in the command center, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't just a war, it was a reckoning. Do you understand now, Admiral? The human asked, his voice lowering with a quiet intensity. This isn't about your fleets, your firepower. This is about humanity's survival, and we'll do whatever it takes to ensure that we're never wiped out again. You can destroy our ships, you can cripple our fleets, but you'll never break us, because we've learned, we've adapted, and we've become something more. The broadcast cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Jarnak stood frozen, his mind reeling. The words echoed through his mind, repeating over and over. The humans weren't just surviving. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for something more, something that the Salon couldn't comprehend. And in that moment, Jarnak realized with horrifying clarity, this wasn't about a battle for power. It was about the very soul of humanity. And humanity was winning. Before he could process the enormity of this revelation, the entire flagship trembled again. Another pulse. Another wave of energy. This time, it was stronger, faster, and it ripped through the heart of the ship like a knife through flesh. Systems failed. Lights flickered and died. And as the fleet began to disintegrate around him, Jarnak's final thought was a sickening truth. The humans had already won, not through brute force, not through weaponry, but through something far more terrifying. They had become the hunters. The flagship's core groaned, its entire structure shuddering as the power systems collapsed. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the floor beneath Jarnak's feet tilted violently. His vision swam, the edges of his consciousness blurring in the chaos. Yet even as the ship tore itself apart, his mind raced with the horrifying realization that he had been outmatched at every turn. The Xalan Empire, once a colossus of power and destruction, was crumbling. It was no longer about strategy or overwhelming force. This wasn't a battle of fleets or weapons. It was the end of an era. The humans hadn't just fought back. They had evolved. And now, in this final moment, Jarnak was nothing more than a witness to their victory. "Admiral." The voice of his tactical officer cut through the panic. We're being boarded. They're on the flagship." Jarnak's mind snapped into focus. Boarded? Impossible. The Xalan ships were impenetrable, fortresses of their own design. No human could breach their defenses. But as he looked around, he saw the truth in his officer's eyes. The impossible had already happened. The humans were here. Through the smoke and the flickering lights, he saw shadows moving across the bridge, fast, efficient, and deadly. The air was thick with tension, and a sharp metallic scent filled his nostrils. The human forces had infiltrated the very heart of the flagship, without firing a single shot. They had used their intelligence, their tactics, and now they were inside. The doors to the command deck burst open with a terrifying clang. The crew shrieked in unison, scattering, but Jarnak stood his ground. He had faced death countless times, but never like this, never with such certainty that it was inevitable. From the smoke, a figure emerged, a human, tall and poised, dressed in the dark uniform of their elite forces. The figure's eyes locked onto Jarnak, and a chilling smile spread across their face. "Admiral Jarnak," the human said, their voice calm, almost sympathetic. "You've been a part of something tragic, something that we will now put to an end." Jarnak's chest tightened. "You think you've won, that you've broken us. You're mistaken. You." The human cut him off with a gesture. "You're right. We didn't break you. We outlasted you. We adapted. And now we've learned something far more valuable than your fleet could ever teach us. This war was never about power, Jarnak. It was about us, the future of humanity." The words hit him like a physical blow. He could feel the weight of them settling into his chest, suffocating him. For the first time, he understood. The humans hadn't come to fight for land or resources. They had come to fight for something deeper, something he had never even considered. "Don't be foolish," Jarnak spat, defiant to the last. "You've won a battle, but not the war. The Empire will retaliate. The full force of the Xalan. You've always underestimated us, Jarnak." The human took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. "But this time, there is no empire left to return to. The war is over." Before Jarnak could respond, the human raised a device in his hand. There was no sound, no warning, only a sudden, cold surge of energy that shot out and engulfed the room in a wave of blinding white light. The admiral staggered back, his body jerking violently. His heart pounded, the pulse of pain in his chest numbing his thoughts. The world around him began to slow, and the sounds of the bridge faded into a distant hum. The light from the energy weapon dimmed, leaving Jarnak gasping for breath, as though he had been submerged in a freezing abyss. And then, as everything fell away, the human's voice echoed in his ears, a haunting whisper of finality. The age of the Xalan is over. Jarnak's vision blurred, his legs failing beneath him. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the figure of the human, standing in the heart of the destruction, watching as the last remnants of the Xalan fleet were consumed by the unrelenting force of the human advance. When Jarnak awoke, the cold was biting, and the silence was overwhelming. The bridge was a wreck, debris scattered across the floor, and the bodies of his officers lay unmoving. He had no idea how long he had been unconscious, but when he attempted to move, a searing pain shot through his body. The device the human had used was still affecting him, rendering him weak, disoriented. He struggled to push himself up, his eyes flickering to the shattered viewport. Outside, the human fleet was already beginning to withdraw, their ships disappearing into the void. The war was over, and there was no coming back from it. The humans had crushed them, not with overwhelming strength, but with something more terrifying: resilience. Jarnak's body trembled, not just from the pain, but from the chilling realization that he had been a part of something foolish. They had underestimated humanity, and now it was too late. The Empire was gone. The Xalan were no more, and the future belonged to humanity. As the last flickers of life slipped away from Jarnak, he could only whisper one word, a final confession to the empty bridge: humanity.